President-elect Trump that they're threatening to put a 25% tariff on all goods coming across the border into the U.S. and Mexico. What I found unfair about the comments is to compare us to Mexico. And I can tell you, Canada is no Mexico.
What I find most insulting about this is not the fact that it could crash the global economy, but that he compared us to Mexico. Let me tell you, Canada's no Mexico. That's where you're going with this? You're going to fight shitty policy and racism with shitty policy and racism, then. Good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah.
Donald Trump just threatened a 25% tariff.
Tariffs. The word tariff to me is the most beautiful word in the entire dictionary.
We're going to tariff the hell out of them.
I am the tariff man.
On all goods coming into the United States from Canada and Mexico. That would raise the price on food, medicine, cars, oil, lumber, concrete. And Trump says it would be a day one priority after his inauguration.
It's a bit of, rinse, wash, repeat, and that cycle going on again.
Even more of a negative downward pressure on U.S. economic growth.
Experts are warning this could eventually impact our wallets.
Yeah, this could directly impact our wallets.
But there's one big problem when it comes to interpreting what Donald Trump is proposing here.
How much will the tariffs affect the price of the Sam Cedar body pillows? I think we can have an exemption. We could probably find a provision. I'll have to canvass, obviously, people here in Canada to make sure that the Prime Minister understands the importance of the Sam Cedar body pillow. He might not approve of all sizes. Those who want the full life-sized Sam, obviously our most popular item for very self-evident reasons, but that one might be a little bit more difficult just because of the costs.
There's the policy, and then there's the posturing. And it's not easy to tell which of the two is real. Let's go through it.
The consequences are going to be devastating for Canada. The U.S. is our largest trading partner. Roughly 70% of the totality of our trade is with the United States.
A 25% tariff is effective.
So just to be clear, by the way, Donald Trump, he said that the whole reason he's doing this to Mexico and Canada is because we're exporting crime and exporting drugs and all this other stuff. And unfortunately, that whole scenario, yeah, it's a bullshit. It's bullshit. I looked it up. So Canada does not export a shit ton of fentanyl to the United States. It's not the key manufacturing center for fentanyl. We do have some precursor ingredients that come in from China. China did a huge crackdown on fentanyl manufacturing, but they do still manufacture the precursor ingredients, and then that stuff is usually shipped over to Mexico, where the Sinaloa cartel, as well as like a couple others, are kind of the key cornerstones of manufacturing those precursor ingredients into fentanyl, which is primarily consumed in the US of A. Canada doesn't do the fentanyl manufacturing. What it does do is MDMA. We produce a lot of MDMA, but that's not what he was really talking about. I don't think a lot of people have a lot of problem with all the Molly, but we do also grow a lot of pot. So we export the weed sometimes to the U.S.
Clean up your room.
In terms of danger, criminals, all that shit that he's talking about, it's the exact opposite. Canada gets 70% of its legal firearms from the United States because the U.S., y'all, are huge gun manufacturers. You just love guns, and then you have a lot of guns, and so that's why it would make sense that is one of the key arms manufacturers. Actually, no, sorry, you are the largest arms manufacturer in the world. As the largest arms manufacturer in the world, you make a lot of weapons, you have a lot of guns, and so when it comes to illegal guns in this country, they come from America. Same thing with Mexico. When it comes to Mexican illegal firearms, apparently 70% of them come from America, which makes sense because America has all these guns, so it's just like one of those things. But like, there's no one on the other side here basically trying to say to the U.S., we're going to impose a tariff on y'all, everything, unless you reduce the amount of illegal guns coming into Canada. because solving that problem would be so complex, multifaceted, and absurd that it's just like going to be a disaster across the board. That's what's being asked in the opposite direction. It's basically Canada, Mexico. We want to end the fentanyl crisis here in the US, and so to do that, we're going to demand that you stop creating all of these drugs and all of these drug dealers and sending them into the US, which is like, even if you were capable of doing that, even if you were capable of completely eliminating the ability to manufacture and sell and export and import drugs to America, tariffs have nothing to do with this. Absolutely nothing. Like, it's so absurd. It's a way of flexing and basically trying to apply economic pressure or economic warfare to two individual countries who happen to be your largest trading partners for $1 trillion worth of trade, I think, a year. And in doing that, like, it's going to be absolutely ridiculous. Like, you can't strong arm another country into solving the drug crisis or the fentanyl crisis. It's so, like, part of me is like, on some level, there's got to be someone thinking whether or not this is true, or wondering that, like, sitting back and being like, oh, well, you know, how do we solve this? What do we do? We got this crisis, and apparently Trump is saying that we have to solve it. And, well, unfortunately, the politicians in Canada, some of them are buying into it, like straight up just saying that, like,
would be to just
this is Marjorie Taylor Greene of Canada, Danielle Smith. She's the premier of Alberta.
start hiring a border patrol so that we can guarantee that we aren't having a free flow of drugs and illegal migrants across the border. We have to make sure that we're addressing the areas of Chinese using us as a backdoor to get into the United States and close those loopholes. It sounds like we've done a better job than Mexico, so I think we can make that case. And we've got to see the Prime Minister chart a pathway to meeting our defense targets, because if we cannot...
Craven, cowardly. What the fuck is wrong with you? Immediately. There's so much Canadian MAGA. It's so cringe. The leader of the Conservative Party in BC said the same thing. He's like, well, Trump has made it very clear. We have a problem and we have to do what he says. And we have to immediately do everything in our power to get rid of all the drugs and to get rid of all the illegals that we're bringing into the United States. And I was like, what? Wait, sorry. You're acknowledging this absurdity, this clown choosery? You're actually saying right now that, like, oh, well, yeah, you know, maybe he's got a point. Maybe this made-up thing that's going to solve a multifaceted problem of addiction, by the way. Like, if Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, came forward and was like, hey, by the way, the opioid crisis was started in large part due to corporations in the US, including Purdue Pharma. These corporations pushed Oxycontin on doctors, who then sold them to their patients, who then got a lot of people addicted to opioids. When they stopped taking the Oxycontin, they discovered they want to keep taking the Oxycontin. At that point, this problem continued to spread, and then once it combined with the fentanyl crisis, cheap, very powerful, you know, synthetic opioids, we find ourselves in the disaster we are in today. Solving this is going to be very difficult, but you know what? Tariffs. If I just impose a 30, 40, 50, 60% tariff on all goods going in from America to Canada, well, then at that point, I can force him. I can be like, solve the thing. Dude, flip the switch. Just make it better. I want you to fix my problem, please. It's easy, right? Like, hey, Canada, solve the fentanyl crisis, the U.S. fentanyl crisis. don't worry about anything. Don't worry about any other ass. Like, we can single-handedly solve this crisis. There's nothing more to do. You know, it's like the 9/11 meme from Family Guy, money to make it safe. Exactly.
Solve those things, and all of the lobbying in the world is going to come for naught. We've got to address the issues that have been identified as pressure points and alleviate them.
Do you think, though, that the way in which it's being characterized by Donald Trump is justified? And I ask because I understand the pushback on defense targets, but there is one that has been set of 2032. If you look in a relative sense at migration and issues at the border, it is a tiny fraction, like 1% of what's happening at the Mexican border. Surely you
Also, by the way, this is like as close as you'll get to good journalism on like mainstream Canadian television, because it's like that question is very valid, right? Where it's like, do you think this is justified considering everything? Like, at the end of the day, it makes no sense, but it's still done so Canadian and friendly like, you know, this like Mehdi Hassan would have been way more intense if he was trying to do this exact same like interview, right? Whereas at this point, it's just kind of like, oh, well, what you think then there? Oh, yeah, I understand the concern, and obviously we don't want to be hosers, but like, you know, what about the fact that only about 1% of the fentanyl comes into the U.S. from Canada? Then, you know, and like, it's true. Why are you buying into this? What's wrong with you?
When you know, you wouldn't be insinuating that Donald Trump is justified in doing this, are you?
Well, just saying we're not as bad as the other guys is not going to fly in this case. What I understand is that we've seen a doubling of the number of interactions at the border from people coming across, up to 200,000 a year now. That's significant. And when you're talking about a drug crisis that is not only hitting us but also hitting the Americans, they want to stop that flow of drugs. When you see that increasingly the open border policy.
So Canadian MAGA exists. It's cringe, and it's a real problem. And honestly, it's beyond, you know, pathetic to see this shit still happening. I can show you Mr. John Rustad. Rustad! His was equally craven, but he didn't do it on television. He just made a little tweety about it. Secures our border. Okay, here it is. Look at this. President Donald J. Trump is threatening tariffs unless Canada secures our border to stop killer drugs and illegal immigrants from entering USA through Canada. Those are his demands. It's time to stop the drugs, secure our southern border, and win the trade negotiations. This is so sad. It's so unbelievably pathetic. We're a different country. Technically, I know we're a vassal state of the U.S. and sometimes England, you know, all hail the king. But how are you responding to this with just like, we got to do it? She says that we're the cause of the illegals and the drugs. We did no choice.
Effectively a 25% tax on whatever comes into the United States based on how expensive that thing is. So if a company's shipping...
And by the way, Americans, I know a lot of people are like, well, you get what you paid for, MAGA. Enjoy. And it's like, all of you who didn't pay for it, first off, are going to get fucked, right? When there's going to be a tariff war, which there is. Like, Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico, who's awesome, by the way, compared to fucking the leaders of Canada, has just straight up said, like, this is bullshit. 70% of illegal firearms in this country, in Mexico, arrive from you, and we're not imposing tariffs. If you impose tariffs on us, we're going to impose tariffs on you. And in the case of Canada, that would have been an amazing thing to echo, which probably will happen in the long term because they're eventually going to have to do something. But you get so many supplies from us. You get lumber, oil, water, like fresh water, like all these kind of things. These are not manufactured products, not end-to-end products where at the end of the day, like these are products that massive corporations in the US, they're going to buy up raw supplies, which they do from us, and then they're going to manufacture products out of those raw supplies. They're going to have to increase the costs of their products. It's going to increase everything. The consumer is the one who's going to be paying the price. Like, I keep trying to explain this in terms of like the EVs, because China apparently makes incredible electric cars. They're amazing. And because they're so good, they're so cheap, they're so efficient, they're very long lasting, which are three things that would definitely damage the electric automobile industry in North America. Well, then it makes sense why someone is going to be like, we're going to impose 100% tariffs. I don't agree with it. I don't think you should. I think you should honestly just allow us to get flooded with good electric vehicles from China. But either way, I can understand the rationale behind saying, I have to impose a tariff on this, because if I don't, our local industry will be destroyed. That at least on paper makes sense. There's a use of a tariff to be like, oh, well, this is not simply because we specifically hate China. It's because they're better at us than this, and we can't compete. So to preserve the local automotive industry, I'm unfortunately, so we don't get flooded with these cheap cars, going to have to increase the price of the car for the consumer so that they will be comparable to the local manufactured vehicle. That on paper makes sense. I don't agree with it. I would oppose it as I did, but like either way, that makes sense. For a universal blanket tariff on all things, aka anything that is going to come in from Canada or Mexico to the US of A is going to have a 25% tariff imposed upon it, meaning that every single company that imports vast amounts of, say, supplies, lumber, for example, and they manufacture things with that lumber, they're going to have to increase the cost and pass that off to the consumer for their product. Because, yes, you pay more for the thing, you're going to have to then pay more for the product. And so the loser of all this is obviously going to be humans. It's going to be consumers, the working class, and eventually it could crash the global economy, which unfortunately is the last piece of the puzzle that Trump needs for the full-blown fascism. He needs a complete economic collapse. I'm not a conspiracy theorist that thinks he's doing this intentionally. I think he's stupid. But I think he wants to just strong-arm the other countries around him and flex. And in doing so, a lot of Republicans and MAGA and the cultists have bought into this idea that he can do this and it's going to be so strong and powerful. And like, yeah, suck it, Canadian commies. Suck it, Mexico commies. We're imposing tariffs on you until you solve our fentanyl crisis. Like, Jesus, you should also look within. You should probably be looking at the fact that so many Americans are addicted to fentanyl, and that's a huge problem. And there's a lot of things that you need to do in order to address the fentanyl crisis, as we have to do a lot of things in our country to address the fentanyl crisis, as Mexico has to do a lot of things to address the war on drugs, which is imposed upon them by the United States. Again, this is not going to solve any of this kind of shit.
In a $40,000 car, now it's a $50,000 car. The company pays the tax, that makes the vehicle more expensive for the consumer, and the US government pockets the difference.
The basic rule of supply is that if the price goes up, I want to produce more of this stuff. If the price goes down, I want to produce less. It means I need less workers, and so people start losing their jobs.
And this is a big problem for a country like Canada, because last year it exported almost $600 billion worth of goods to the United States. That's more than 3/4 of all of Canada's exports. And Canada's trade relationship with the US is about 2/3 of this country's GDP. The top 5 exports: energy, that's mainly crude oil, and cars. And note, that includes car parts. The auto industry is a really good example of how damaging tariffs can be for those who have to pay them. Because cars aren't just built in one country. The engine might be built in one place, the transmission in another. Then they're assembled in yet another place. And all of these components can cross national borders multiple times before they magically turn into a car. A tariff charges a tax.
Wait, what's the magic? Why don't you explain the magic part? I want to know the magic part.
Every time they do.
The average car crosses the border 7 or 8 times, 8, 9 times over the course of its production, trying to unwind.
I thought it was like 2. I didn't know it was 7 or 8. I understand, yes, especially with complex manufacturing, it usually does have to do things like that where it keeps going back and forth between plants and automotive industries. I didn't know it was that many times. This is going to be such a disaster. Can you imagine having to pay a tariff levy each time? It's like, okay, so those, wheels initially have been manufactured and they've been turned and they've been added with rims and all that kind of stuff. And that's been added to a frame. We now have to ship that to Canada. Canada has done a retaliatory tariff on us. So that's going to, increase the cost of importing it. Okay. They've now added, the outside, the shell, they've added the engine. They're now going to have to ship it back to you because now they're going to have to add new things like glass and then windshield wipers. And you do that 7 times in a row, 7 tariff levies. Holy shit. Yeah, the cost, it's going to be just completely nonsensical. Like this is why I'm like, because he's fucking with the bag here, Trump, there's going to be a lot of pressure from corporations to be like, fuck you. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, this is absolute bullshit, That I think will apply more pressure than any spineless Democrat. Like, you're not going to see... I know Congress... I was watching the Legal Eagle video. Apparently, Congress can impose, measures upon tariffs. But then he was using some old-timey Cold War provision to get around that last time. So, and also, the Democrats literally have no spine. They're just gelatinous blobs of goo. So that's not really something I think that they're going to put up a fight for. They're going to be like, oh, no, we just got to bide our time. And 2028 is when we'll make a comeback by doing nothing but changing and going further to the right in perpetuity.
In that, in a way that doesn't hurt American consumers, is an incredibly difficult task. I spoke to one trade analyst in the United States who said, Tinkering even a little bit with the fundamentals of that trade organization is like doing surgery without anesthesia.
And consider how some parts manufacturers have plants on both sides of the Canada-US border, and many ship parts between locations constantly. A company like that would have to completely rethink its supply chain, or else face 25% higher costs, sometimes multiple times for the same product.
What this could end up doing is might be bizarre, but you might see a lot of new deals happening where all of a sudden Canada and Mexico start looking elsewhere and, you know, start looking for other markets to be able to, you know, start buying up vast amounts of their supplies, including like fresh water. I don't understand it. Oh, sorry. I don't know whether or not you'd be able to like export fresh water to another location. It makes sense that it goes right to the US, but crude oil, I mean, China's going to want that crude oil. There's lots of countries that are going to want that crude oil, right? And is that going to open up more international trade with other parts of the world? Well, at the same time, the United States is like, oh, well, you know, fine, we'll make our own oil then, and then it's going to be a house of cards from this entire concept to execution.
You're a manufacturer that is responsible for that supply chain. Would you not just move your supply chain entirely into the US and forget the idea of having to deal with tariffs entirely?
Then there's the impact on everyday Americans.
Canada provides raw goods. We send energy, we send lumber, we send steel, we send grain. So American consumers, if these go ahead, are going to get clobbered by essentially.
Especially since Mexico's a neutral country. Yeah, and also that, like, you know, the difference already with Claudia Sheinbaum is that she has, and Mexico has, a apparently much more robust trading deal with China, and has already announced that she's going to be imposing 0% tariffs on Chinese electric EVs, which kind of makes me want to go to Mexico to get a Chinese EV and then take it back up. But would I have to then pay tariffs as I cross through the United States, going from Tijuana into the US and then going from there all the way up to Canada? I like, you know, not that I'm going to do any of this, by the way. I keep forgetting sometimes that I'm live in front of almost 1,000 people.
Taxes on everything they consume.
You know how much fruit and vegetables?
That was all a sketch. Whoop whoop, making my silly voices. It was a whizzle wazzle. Yeah, once again doing the silly show on the internet. Nothing I say is real. I should put the disclaimer back on. What? Yeah, there it is. That's the whole thing. I don't even know what I'm doing. Yay.
The U.S. imports from Canada and Mexico. According to the U.S. government, in 2022, about half of all fresh fruit and almost 90% of vegetables came from those two countries. All of that produce could become 25% more expensive.
By the way, did you hear that, America? Apparently a vast amount of your produce is coming from Mexico, which makes sense because Mexico is hot, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, wondrous place. I've been to Mexico a few times. I love Mexico. I love Mexicans, and I have no idea why we're all suddenly becoming real racist against one another. I'm talking to you, Mr. Doug Ford, who was talking shit. I just want to quickly, people were asking me, what do you mean by that? And this.
We received the biggest threat we've ever received from our closest friends and ally.
He's a Trump supporter and has been for a while, by the way. The fact that now he's kind of like, what the fuck? Trump bad? No one is allowed to act surprised or do Trump bad, especially politicians at the highest levels at this point in history, okay? Not only has there already been 4 years of Donald Trump, but there's also been, you know, the attempted coup, the insurrection, the stealing of the election, the nonstop, like, fucking bloviating, the criminal charges, the rapes. Like, the list is so endless to suddenly be like, it's a surprise. Apparently, a man who is orange is bad. And it's like, yeah, he is. He's quite bad.
President-elect Trump, that they're threatening to put a 25% tariff on all goods coming across the border into the U.S. and Mexico. What I found unfair about the comments is to compare us to Mexico. And I can tell you, Canada is no Mexico.
I'll see your shitty actions, Trump, and raise you getting real racist with it. Yeah, you know? I keep thinking of that Ta-Nehisi Coates fucking meme where it's like, whoa, that was really racist. That was really, really racist. What I find most insulting about this is not the fact that it could crash the global economy, but that he compared us to Mexico. Let me tell you, Canada's no Mexico. That's where you're going with this? You're going to fight shitty policy and racism with shitty policy and racism, then. That's good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah. Well, hey, Canada's trash. Okay, I think that's what this is all showing you. We have a combination essentially right now of a whole bunch of premiers of provinces who are all just like running in circles. The premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, is essentially a separatist who wants to join America and has been trying to do so for some time now, and is part of the whole not Blexit. It's called something even cringier. But she's essentially trying to make Alberta its own sovereign nation or join the U.S., which clown shoes. And she is someone who will oftentimes shit all over the federal government until something like this happens. And now she's like, we have to do what Trump says. We have to. If we don't do what Trump says, he'll punish us, and we're bad. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, that is not really going to happen, because it's actually mathematically impossible for us to solve the fentanyl crisis in the US. It's just, not only do we not produce the fentanyl that they're consuming, or at least the vast majority of it, but also it's not going to be able to be something that we can solve domestically in the United States, because we're a different country. So clown shoes don't do what he wants in terms of like, yes, Trump right, Trump is correct, we have to do what he says kind of shit. But now apparently she's begging Justin Trudeau for help, the prime minister, and being like, help me, federal government. Once again,
we do approximately, just Ontario alone, $500 billion of two-way trade. I found his comments unfair. I found him insulting. It's like a family member stabbing you right in the heart. I spent a lot of time in the U.S.
I was honestly hoping that this would have been a moment, especially after seeing what happened in Mexico, watching Claudia Sheinbaum come forward and just fucking wreck Trump, you know, full middle fingers blasting coming out of the gates and being like, yeah, as the only adult in the room, here's the rub. The reality is that the majority of our illegal weapons come from your country. The synthetic drug problem was not caused by us, and you are the consumers of the synthetic drugs. So if you want to cause both a global economic crash and destroy your own economy and destroy the ability for fucking consumers in your country to buy goods, go ahead, we'll retaliate. That's how it's done. Very, very well said. Thank you. Thank you for being the only adult in the room. Meanwhile, the premiers of the provinces of Canada are all over the map.
Yeah.
In some directions, we have some clowns who are just straight up like, well, Trump must be right. He's made very clear and concise terms. We are the creators of the fentanyl and the creators of the illegal immigrants, and we brought the illegal immigrants, and I saw the illegal immigrants, and it smiled at me, and I was scared. And we have to do what he says. If we don't do what he says, then the tariffs are coming. Okay. That was very embarrassing. Okay, Doug Ford, what do you got? Mexico sucks. Anything else? I'm deeply hurt. It hurts me. I'm hurt. I got stabbed in the back by a family member. I love Trump. I did everything for him. I said Orange Man good. And now it turns out the Orange Man is bad. And it really makes me sad. And okay. Well, all right. The premier of BC, at least, was, a little less craven. He made a statement along the lines of, this is not true. We are not the cause of the fentanyl crisis in the United States. We are not the cause of the large amount of illegal immigrants who come into the U.S. And yeah, I mean, the truth is on your side, friends. If you wanted to actually, grow some ovaries and fucking present yourself, you could actually come forward and tell the reality of the situation. Canada's not the cause of the fentanyl crisis. Both Canada and Mexico receive the majority of their illegal weapons from the United States. So if tariffs were necessary in order to prevent crime and violence, then certainly they would have been levied a long time ago by our nations, but we haven't done that because we understand the importance of international trade. We cannot solve a problem by trying to force another country's hand simply for economic reasons. This will crash the global economy. I mean, all of that is true, right? Shout out to Zachap. Thank you so much for the raid. Can everyone go to twitch.tv/Zachap? Give Zachap a follow back.
And I have yet to talk to one American that has any issue with Canadians. We see drugs flow from Mexico, coming up through California, in through BC, into Alberta, into Ontario. And what we need to do is take that threat seriously. I had a conversation.
See, this is the problem with Canadian conservatives. And like, so there's two Canadian conservatives you've seen, all right? There's the Marjorie Taylor Greene, Danielle Smith. She was basically like, Trump's right. We have to do whatever he says. Oh my God. Oh my God. And then there's Doug Ford, a Canadian conservative, who's like, I'm so hurt by Trump, but I'm also a conservative right-winger, and I'm just going to get real racist with it and be like, Trump, don't get mad at Canada. We're the good ones. Get mad at Mexico. They're the bad ones. Why you do this to us? I feel betrayed. I feel betrayed by him when really at the end of the day, you should be mad at Mexico. It's the Mexicans that cause all of our problems. It's the Mexicans that bring all the drugs here. And that's a lie too, by the way. Canada is a chief manufacturer of MDMA, and we export a lot of MDMA. Canada is a chief manufacturer of marijuana, and we export a lot of marijuana. It's not as if we don't manufacture and export drugs. We just don't specifically manufacture and export fentanyl. But again, you can't solve the drug crisis through a tariff war. It's utterly absurd. And doing this is just like, well, I mean, it's nice, I guess, that he's not basically saying Trump right and we have to do whatever he says. But his solution is to lie and be like, the problem is Mexico. We have a golden opportunity here, all right? We should unite with Mexico. Claudia Sheinbaum has shown us the way. She has shown us the one true path. She's actually been the adult in the room for 3 separate countries, by the way. Surprise, surprise. And we should actually be uniting with Mexico to point out that Trump is utterly and completely absurd. And we can also unite with our American homies and friends who are also willing to point out that Trump is utterly and completely absurd. We could unite together, the entire working class globally, you know, something to that effect, and actually point out that this is all ludicrous. It makes no sense at all. Thanks for all the BC butt I smoked over the years. You're very, very welcome. It should be one of Canada's chief exports.
Plan for economy and security that puts Canada first. But despite the fact the Prime Minister has known for years that Trump was threatening these tariffs, and for 3 weeks that President Trump had won the election, the only plan he has is a Zoom call. No plan to reverse his disastrous liberalization of drugs that have killed people and now threaten our borders. No plan to fix the broken borders that he caused. No plan to cancel the tax increases that will drive billions and many jobs away. Where's the plan to put Canada first?
Instead of panicking and falling back on slogans like the Leader of the Opposition, we rolled up our sleeves and we're getting to work. We're working with all the premiers, pulling together in a Team Canada approach, because that's how we defend Canadian jobs from coast to coast to coast. I spoke with Donald Trump yesterday evening, talked about how important it was for us to work together to solve some of the challenges we're facing as a continent, as countries, but also work to grow our economy, protect our workers on both sides of the border. This is
I don't want to hear about how you had a friendly conversation. I want to hear about how you said, suck my balls, Mr. Trump. That would have been fun.
Responsible, methodical approach we're taking as we move forward, while our opponent falls back on slogans and fear.
He spoke with the incoming president, and moments later, Mr. Trump put out a tweet slapping a 25% tariff on Canada. So that worked about as well as the Prime Minister's efforts on Buy America and softwood lumber, which continue to be penalized, even though the previous Conservative government got both of those things lifted. Now move over to drugs. The Prime Minister's disastrous legalization and liberalization of drugs has the...
By the way, this is not true. To anyone who's been watching and viewing internationally, okay, if you're in other countries right now, you're watching me in Germany or something, and you're like, oh, whoa, what? Canada legalized drugs? That's wild. How's that working out? We didn't. There's no such thing. We do not have a blanket legalization of drugs. Marijuana was legalized about, I think, 8 years ago when Trudeau came into power. That was one of the few campaign promises he made that he followed through with. That's actually really good, and I'm happy that he legalized marijuana. But in terms of Canada having just legal drugs across the board, vending machines where you can buy crack on the streets, no, none of that is true. There's a variety of different provinces that have had or tried different harm reduction methods. British Columbia is one of them. We have been basically one of the key epicenters of the fentanyl crisis. We have disastrously high amounts of overdoses, and I live near the downtown east side of Vancouver, where you will see, as soon as you walk out the door, people smoking crack, people injecting heroin. I see it literally every single day when I walk outside of my house, and it's really profoundly sad, obviously, to see people that deep into the drug crisis. The harm reduction strategies has reduced the amount of people who have died from overdoses. All the data points towards that. If you look at it, any single metric, it's been harm reduction strategies, providing naloxone kits, providing overdose kits, that has reduced the amount of people who have died from overdoses. You have seen an increase overall of the amount of people who have been dying and using drugs because the lines correlate directly with the amount of people suddenly using fentanyl once it's introduced, carfentanil and other stronger opioids. And so that's the reason why, yes, obviously the amount of people who die from overdoses, that's not because of naloxone. Naloxone literally saves your life. If you're about to die from an opioid overdose, learn how to use one, learn how to use it in order to, provide potential life-saving, support for your friends or family or other people who might use drugs. But it's been vilified completely by conservatives and the right, and they've twisted the whole thing to be like, it's actually the legalization of drugs in Canada that has led to all these crises. It's actually the harm reduction that is leading to all the deaths. And it's like, no, again, the data can be misleading if someone just shows you a scary chart and you see a line go like that, because it's like, yes, but that's when fentanyl is introduced. If you look before fentanyl is introduced, you can see the line go like this and then lightly dip down, because that's where harm reduction starts getting introduced, so less people die from overdoses. Once full-scale fentanyl is introduced into the drug supply, well then yeah, the amount of people who are both dying and getting hardcore addicted to it is going to skyrocket as well. That's not that's happening under illegal drug policies. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Americans worried, in addition to costing 47,000 deaths in Canada. Where's the plan to stop the drugs and keep our border open to trade?
Once again, the leader of the opposition is just making stuff up. I clearly spoke with the President of the United States an hour and a half after he put out his suggestion on tariffs. The reality is we're going to continue to work constructively with the incoming administration to protect Canadian jobs, to protect Canadian growth, to take the responsible approach that isn't steeped in partisanship, that pulls together the Team Canada approach that stands up for Canadian.
Oh, that must suck so much. It's so brutal. It's just fucking two losers battle it out. By the way, this is going to be the future Prime Minister of Canada, and I say this to the entire world if you want to see just how cringe this dude is.
Justin, I hope you're nice and toasty in Brazil, where you just flew, burning over 100 tons of jet fuel and putting over 100 tons of emissions into the atmosphere. Also that you could sit around on a big fancy panel giving a speech lecturing Canadians about why they are wrong to oppose your carbon tax.
And it's really, really easy when you're in a short-term survive. I got to be able to pay the rent this month. I got to be able to buy groceries for my kids, to say, okay, let's put climate change as a slightly lower priority. And that's something that's instinctive. When the storm comes, you want to hunker down and just sort of huddle up and wait for it to blow over. We can't do that around climate change. And unfortunately, we have an awful lot of political amplification of the kind of narrative that is directly opposed to that.
You claim that Canadians are just naive and they've been tricked by what you call disinformation into opposing this tax on their heat, housing, food, and fuel. But Canadians are not stupid, Justin. They oppose the tax because they see its price at the grocery store, where food has gone up 36% faster here in Canada than in the United States, a phenomenon that, incidentally, coincided with the application of your tax. They also know that the Parliamentary Budget Officer...
It's just also cringe. And what's with the walking towards the camera? It's like Aaron Sorkin was chugging turpentine or some shit. And then in addition to that, I completely agree in the principle that we shouldn't be passing the cost of climate change directly on to consumers exclusively, which a lot of policies related to, say, things like carbon taxes can. But it's not as if he's going to replace it with anything. Like, it's not the necessary step. The necessary step that, like, the scientists are telling us is that we need to rein in our use of fossil fuels and stop just exacerbating the problem by continuing to consume them all under this capitalist hellscape. So if you were going to, say, nationalize the oil and gas industry again, if you are going to impose the cost of the damages from CO2 on oil and energy sectors and companies, that would be good. That would be great, actually. Do that instead of, passing it on to consumers. But that's not it. It's just like, I'm just going to get rid of it. We're going to axe the tax. We're going to axe the tax and make the groceries a little more affordable. And everyday Canadians will realize that. And I'm slightly more swole now, so I'm a man. Like, no. It's all utter bullshit. But unfortunately, it's working, and he's going to win the next election, most likely when it's called in a couple months, and this will be the new Prime Minister of Canada. For how long, I do not know. But it sucks because it's just such a blowout that it's like it's not even close. It barely moves every single time I check out the recent polls. Yeah. It's like, mathematically, there's just... It's one of those things where I just have to accept it, because if I was like, we have to do everything in our power, we have to rally behind the Liberals, come on, leftists, get behind Justin Trudeau, get behind him, that would actually be pathetic. Justin Trudeau needs to step down. They need to completely revitalize their party. Honestly, the Worker Party, which is the NDP at 18, they have not changed in terms of their general and broad support. Again, looking at the disaster that is this, I would recommend to everybody who's getting depressed about elections, especially with the US one being a disaster as well, concentrate locally. Honestly, concentrate on your local elections. Concentrate on filling your local city council with lefties. Concentrate on getting your mayor elected who happens to be a little bit more left-leaning. Sometimes the mayors have to be a little bit more center-left just to appeal to the general demographic, but get left-wing councillors in there, get left-wing boards, and elect a local official of your concentration who happens to be a leftist. That's where, even if we do have smaller numbers, I admit the left is 8% usually, like left, not like libs include the left. I'm talking about just like if you're an actual leftist. But you could actually focus on that. The editor of the Serf cartoons, the little doggos, these cute little guys, his name is Kyle. He works with the Democratic Socialists of Democratic Socialists of Seattle. And they've successfully, through their canvassing, had Shama Sawant in power for a while now. She's one of the reasons why Seattle has the $15 minimum wage, and they got that a long time ago. She's one of the reasons why Seattle has rent freezing, as in, predatory landlords can't continuously increase the cost of living. And she's also one of the reasons why there's been so many other leftist policies that have been implemented in that part of the US of A. So that's a great model, because at the end of the day, there's not a lot of people who vote in your local elections, and a lot of people concentrate on the federal elections because they're sexier. Like, just listen to the music.
Has said that 100% of middle-class families pay more in carbon tax costs than they get back in.
See, you got that copyright clear, public domain rock and roll vibes to it. So there you go.
Hey, if you'd like to unlock secret bonus episodes as well as uncensored content, go to patreon.com/The Serfs. This show is produced by Anna Loves Riley, Arian McCarthy, Cheryl Alvarez, Comrade Junkie, Doug Caddy, Everything Important, Hagbard Celine, Jimmy Sombrero, Voltimondi, Omni, Political Poppy, Preston Kroll, Quiet 185, Riley and Anna, Roller Dragon, Cernicus, Stellar Gwyn, Sebastian Demel, Travis McClinton, Trincel, Words Greenwood, with additional support coming from all of these amazing human beings right here.